In a world ruled by giants was lives.
They were the pioneers, the first birds to master the liminal world between land and sea.
In the world after they thrived, they spread across the globe, diverse thousand forms.
But the surface was a crowded place. The greatest prizes lay hidden, buried in the wet sand, and a hidden world of food, an endless bounty, waiting for a key that could unlock it. The question was, what would that key look like?
The key was an evolutionary breakthrough, a slow elongation of the beak, a gentle downward curve that would transform the hunt. This new tool allowed for a new technique, probing, using the sensitive tip of the beak to feel for hidden movement, to hunt by touch. And the hidden world was unlocked. An entire pantry of food, now available, fueling it was the perfect tool. An elegant, sensitive, and deadly instrument, perfectly sculpted by the demands of a hidden world. And with this new tool, a new dynasty was born. The Curlews, who would spread their elegant form across the world. And spread they did. From their point of origin, the Curlew family colonized the world, adapting to classless. And as they spread, they changed. Adapting to new foods and new habitats, they became a diverse family of. In North America, several branches of the family took hold. The great long-billed curlew of the prairies. These were its cousins, sharing the same ancient blueprint, but already on their own, unique evolutionary paths. And it was here, in the vast, harsh, and beautiful expanse of the Arctic, that the stage was set for the evolution. The Arctic has one brief season of life, an explosion of growth under a sun that never sets. And with the thaw comes an explosion of insects, a brief but almost limitless buffet of protein. The constant daylight and endless food made the Arctic a perfect nursery. The chicks grew fat and strong with astonishing speed. And so, over thousands of years, this lineage was forged by the North, shaped by the brief.
As generations pass, a new, smaller, and more graceful bird emerges from the ancestral line, adapted for greater travel.
And so, a new species was born, the Eskimo Curlew. A smaller, faster, and more efficient. It was a close relative of the whimbrel, but it was a more delicate bird, smaller, with warmer brown plumage and temperaments. Though part of a family of large birds, the Eskimo Curlew was different. It was smaller, more delicate, a bird. Its plumage was a warmer brown, tinged with cinnamon. A perfect match for the northern soils and the great prairies of the heartland. But the greatest difference was in their numbers. While its cousins traveled in modest flocks, the Eskimo Curlew. This flocking behavior was the engine for a more extreme journey. A migration route that was faster, smaller, faster, traveling in numbers beyond imagining. Though a curlew by name, it was a creature entirely its own. As the great ice sheets retreated, they carved a new world. And through the center of the continent, a vast. And this new land produced a bounty of its own. Vast swarms of insects, particularly. And so the final adaptation was set. The curlew's migration was perfectly timed to this explosion. Its journey was a legacy of the ice, a path carved by a vanished world, which it would follow faithfully for the next 10,000 years. Shaped by the ice and fueled by the prairies, the Eskimo Curlew had become a master of the wind. Its body was a perfect engine for flight. Powerful muscles, a respiratory system that could extract a skill that allowed them to perform one of the most incredible feats in the animal kingdom, a non-stop 2,000-mile journey over the open ocean. it. And in the wake of the thaw, a miniature world emerges. Not of great trees, but of a rich carpet of moss. And into this world of brief abundance, the travelers arrive. Their great journey is over. They have come home. This is their home. A vast, beautiful, and demanding world. The land of the midnight sun. In the Arctic summer, the ordinary rules of day and night are broken. The sun never sets. This endless daylight bathes the world in a golden glow, illuminating the rich tapestry of the tundra floor. For the curlews, there is no time to rest. The constant daylight is a gift, allowing for an endless cycle. A portrait, painted in the gold of a sun that never sleeps.
It was a golden season, a brief, magical window of endless light and endless life.
It was a shared duty. The parents took turns incubating the eggs and standing guard, their eyes constantly.
This was their view. A world with no walls and no ceiling. A world of constant exposure, where danger could come from any direction. All of this, for this. A precious handful of eggs. The entire hope of the next generation, after weeks of patient incubation, a sign of life. The shell, once a fortress, is now a prison to be broken. And with final, exhaustive push, a new life emerges. Wet, weak, but
it is born with its first defense already in place. A coat of soft down, perfectly patterned to match the tundra.
The parents' vigil is not over. Now, the real work begins. To protect this tiny, fragile, the nest, once a place of quiet hope, is now a cradle of new life. The next generation has arrived. In a land with no trees, the nest is a simple affair. A shallow scrape in the earth, lined with whatever and so their shared vigil begins. The parents take turns incubating the eggs and standing guard.
This was their view. A world with no walls and no ceiling. A world of constant exposure, where danger could come from any direction.
A humble cradle on the open ground, holding the entire promise of the future. A promise protected by feathers and a watchful eye. After weeks of patient incubation, a sign of life. The shell, once a fortress, is now a prison to be broken. And with a final, exhaustive push, a new life emerges. Wet, weak. It is born with its first defense already in place. A coat of soft down, perfectly patterned to match its. The parents' vigil is not over. Now, the real work begins. To protect this tiny...
The nest, once a place of quiet hope, is now a cradle of new life. But new life on the tundra is a powerful lure, and the predators are always watching. The parent's watchful eye is the first defense. And if camouflage is not enough, the parent will resort to courage. A desperate gamble, a display of faith. The dangers did not only come from the ground. The silent hunters of the sky, the great owls, were always watching.
Protection is only the first duty. The next is to teach. The parent shows the young how to use the family's patience, and the young learn by watching. A clumsy imitation at first, but the instinct is there. The ancients. And then, success. The first hunt, the first meal earned by its own skill. With every meal, they grow stronger. The endless buffet of the Arctic summer fuels a period of astonishingly rapid growth. The lesson is complete. The young have mastered the art of the hunt, and are now ready for the next great challenge of their lives. And as the short summer wears on, a new transformation begins. The soft down of the chick gives way to those, and now it must learn the family trade. The first clumsy flaps, the short, awkward hops.
An entire generation now ready. The short, bountiful summer has done its work.
The brief Arctic summer has forged a new generation. They are ready for the world.
To be born here is to be born into a world of challenges.
And so, the hardship forged resilience. The constant danger created perfect camouflage. The greatest gift of their Arctic home was the gift of endurance. They were survivors.
But the golden season is short. A change in the wind, a shift in the light.
And so, the first chapter of their lives comes to a close. Their time in their Arctic home is over.
The Arctic summer is a fleeting gift. As the days begin to shorten and a new chill enters the air, from across the vast tundra, they come. Small family groups, drawn by instinct to ancient staging ground. There is a restless energy in the flock, a final preening of feathers, a building chorus of calls.
And then, the moment comes. A single bird, a single call, and the ground. They become a river in the sky. A living, breathing current of life, pulled south.
It is a sight that is difficult for the modern mind to comprehend. Not a flock, but a nation of... So dense were their numbers that they were said to darken the sun, a living eclipse that would pass over the land for hours at a time. They moved as one, a single mind with a million bodies, a silent, synchronized...
Their journey first took them south.
Their first great stopover. Here, on the eastern coast of Canada, they would feast on the autumn.
And then, the Great Leap. A non-stop journey south over the Atlantic Ocean. It was a journey fraught with peril. A single storm could scatter the flock or drive them far off course.
But they were masters of the wind. After days of flight, the survivors would make landfall. They had reached their winter continent.
After thousands of miles, they reached their most important destination on the journey north.
And here they found their fuel, the great swarms of the Rocky Mountain locust.
For the early farmers, the arrival of the curlews was a blessing. They were a feathered army, descending from the sky to...
The accounts of the time all speak of the same thing, of skies turned black with birds. This was the engine room of their migration, the great refueling. Without the bounty...
To fly in a flock of a million is a feat of impossible coordination. A million bodies, moving, they would turn and flow like a single great creature, a living cloud that moved with a grace that defied understanding. This beautiful dance had a deadly purpose. For a predator, the shifting, endless mass of bodies pleasance. The secret was a constant, unspoken communication. Each bird watching its neighbor, responding to the... The journey south was a marathon, a flight of thousands of miles that would take them across a dozen different landscapes. They followed the great rivers, the ancient arteries of the continent, using them as a map written on the land itself.
Even the great mountain ranges were no obstacle.
They followed the great rivers, the ancient arteries of the continent, using them as a map written on the land itself.
But they flew on. Through storm and over mountain, they were an unstoppable force, driven by an ancient promise.
From the shores of the Great Gulf, they made another leap of faith, the final water crossing that would take them to their winter continent.
A journey powered by nothing but muscle, instinct, and the incredible endurance of their powerful wings. They had arrived, the southern continent. But their journey was not yet over.
This was their destination, the Great Pampas of Argentina. A vast grassland, the Great Southern Migration was complete. A journey of some 8,000 miles, a testament to the power of instinct and endurance. After thousands of miles, they reached their most important destination on the journey north. And here, they found their fuel. A feast of such epic proportions, they could double their body weight in a matter of...
It was a moment of perfect timing, honed over millennia. The arrival of the birds. This was the engine room of their migration, the great refueling.
And as the 19th century progressed, a new witness arrived on the plains. The homesteader, the farmer.
The accounts of the time all speak of the same thing, of a living storm cloud on the...
The living river would flow for hours, sometimes even for days. A constant, unbroken stream.
It was one of the great natural wonders of the Americas, a spectacle of life on a scale that we will never...
And the total population was even greater. While impossible to know for sure, their numbers were likely in the tens. This was the Eskimo Curlew at the height of its power. A sight of almost unimaginable abundance. From the shores of the Great Gulf,
A journey powered by nothing but muscle, instinct, and the incredible endurance of their powerful wings. They had arrived, the southern continent. But their journey was not yet over.
and then, at last, their destination, the Great Pampas of Argentina, a vast grassland. After days of non-stop flight over the empty ocean, a new world appears, the southern continent. But their journey was not yet over. The final leg of their journey took them over a new world of dense forests and great, winding rivers.
The Great Southern Migration was complete. A journey of some 8,000 miles.
Here, they would trade the cold of the Arctic winter for the warmth of a southern summer. A time to rest, to feed, and to regain their strength. But their time here was borrowed. As the southern sun began to weaken, the ancient call of the north would... Here, on the Pampas of Argentina, they would spend the winter. A time of rest, of feeding, and of... The grasslands were rich with life. Here, They would feast on the abundant grasshoppers, regaining the strength lost during their long flight. But their time here was borrowed. As the southern sun began to weaken, the ancient call of the north would— The quiet months of rest and feeding were over. They were strong, and they were ready. The great journey was about to begin again. Sky once more. A great river of birds, now flowing north. The journey north was a mirror of their journey south. A grueling, 1,000-mile flight back to the heart of the continent. And once more, they returned to the Great Plains. The final feast, the last great refueling that would— It was a race against time. A final, desperate push north to arrive in the Arctic at the exact moment of the great thaw. They have returned. The great circle of migration is complete. They have come home.
This was their life. A perfect, unbroken wheel, turning with the seasons.
It was a rhythm on a planetary scale. A great, pulsing heartbeat that traced a path between two continents. And in the deepest, darkest winter, the North would wait, confident in the promise of their return. An unbroken circle, a promise always kept, a true marvel of migration, perfected by time.
This was their life, an unending journey, a 16,000-mile circle, repeated faithfully.
When the Great Migration was over, the daily work began. A life constant foraging of seekers. They were adaptable hunters. In the Arctic, they sought out insects. On the coast, berries. The autumn berries were the most crucial fuel of all. A rush of pure sugar converted into the fat that would— On the prairies, it was a different kind of hunt. A game of speed and sight, snatching the abundant grasshoppers from the sea of grass. Their entire life was a journey that followed the seasons of abundance. A life made possible by the great feasts of the land. But of all its skills, its greatest was the one for which it was named. The art of the probe. The tip of the beak was a sensitive instrument, packed with nerve endings. It allowed the curlew to feel patience. It was a methodical hunt, a slow walk, a pause, and then the deep, sensitive probe.
This was the world its beak unlocked, a rich and endless pantry of protein, hidden just beneath the surface.
A perfect tool, and the perfect skill to wield it. The Eskimo Curlew was the master of the world beneath the surface. For a master of long-distance flight, nothing was more important than its feathers. They were its engine, its rudder, and its shield against the elements. And so, hours were spent each day in meticulous maintenance. The act of preening, using the beak to influence. It uses a special tool, an oil gland at the base of its tail. This natural, waterproof dressing is— The result was a perfect shield. A waterproof coat of armor that kept the bird warm and dry in the harshest of weather. For a bird that lived its life on the wing, this was not vanity. It was a matter of life and death.
Though shy by nature, the Eskimo Curlew was a deeply social creature. Its survival was a story.
The flock was held together by a constant stream of communication, a complex language of calls that guided their flight and warned of danger. The flock was held together by a constant stream of communication, a complex language of calls that guided their flight and warned of danger. Within the flock, some would stand as sentinels. Their sharp eyes scanned the horizon for danger, ready to sound the alarm.
And the flock would respond as one. 1,000,000 bodies, taking to the air in an instant.
This was the secret to their success. A life lived together, a belief in the power of the flock.
In a life of constant exposure, vigilance was a shared duty. And the flock would respond as one. 1,000,000 bodies, taking to the air in an instant.
For a hunter, the swirling mass was a fortress of confusion. A target,
But their language was not only of danger. There were the soft contact calls, the social glue.
It was a society on the wing, held together by a shared language, a shared purpose, and Even for the masters of endurance, there must be a time for rest. As dusk fell, for them, safety was not in cover, but in openness. In a roosting site with no trees and no tall grass. And as darkness fell, a great silence would descend upon the flock. A silent army. But the great flock was not an anonymous crowd. Within it were thousands of smaller families, the parents and
a continent of birds at rest. A sight of profound and silent beauty.
But the great flock was not an anonymous crowd. It was a nation of families. Within the great parents, the family was a traveling nursery. The young birds, on their first great migration, flew under the watchful eyes. The parents passed down a map of food, a shared knowledge of where to find the richest bounty at each point on their long journey.
And in the great storms, the family bond was their anchor. A small island of shared strengths.
The great flock was a nation of families. A society built on the strength of the parent-child bond. For the young birds, born just months ago in the Arctic, this was their first great journey. A lesson on a continental scale. And they learned from the masters, their parents. They followed their lead, memorizing the great rivers. They learned more than just the path. They learned the pantry, where to find the richest food, and how to extract it. It was more than instinct. It was a culture, a chain of knowledge passed from parent to child. And their society was not exclusive. They often traveled with other wanderers, forming great, mixed flocks.
And in this diversity, there was strength. Different calls, different flight patterns.
They could feed side by side, each species using its own specialized tools to harvest a different part of the bounty. There was enough for everyone. A great, traveling city of wings. A temporary society of many nations, all shared. But for all its life in the great crowds, at its heart, the Eskimo Curlew was a shy and secretive bird.
This was the essence of the Eskimo Curlew, a life of two halves, the shy, hidden protector of...
On the nesting grounds, its instinct was not to fight, but to vanish. It could slip away from its nest like a genius. But in the great flock, this shyness disappeared. There was a confidence that came from a million pairs of eyes, the shy hermit and the bold traveler. A creature that had to master both solitude and society to survive its extraordinary life. This was the Eskimo Curlew, a creature of quiet grace and of epic journeys. To understand the Eskimo Curlew, one must first understand its appearance. And its appearance was a story of the ancients. On its Arctic nesting grounds, this plumage was a cloak of invisibility, a perfect mimicry of the moss and the same coat served it just as well on the great prairies. A versatile disguise for a bird that called two continents home. It was a defense so perfect it could deceive the sharpest eyes in the north. A matter of life, it was a simple coat of brown and buff. But it was also a masterpiece of evolution, a coat of survival. In the family of curlews, it was a creature of delicate stature, noticeably smaller and more graceful than its larger, more robust cousins. This smaller frame was not a weakness, it was a specialist's advantage. A body perfectly engineered. Its smaller size was also tied to a different diet. It was a specialist in the small and the numerous. This ability to feast on the small and numerous allowed it to accumulate incredible fat reserves. A smaller body, a more efficient engine, a different diet. It was a body perfectly sculpted for the longest of journeys. But of all its features, one defined it, the signature of its family,
the long, elegant, down-curved beak. The tip of the beak was a sensitive instrument, packed with nerve endings. It allowed the curlew to feel the slight. It was a methodical hunt. A slow walk, a pause, and then the deep, sensitive probe.
This was the world its beak unlocked. A rich and endless pantry of protein, hidden just beneath the surface. A perfect tool, and the perfect skill to wield it. The Eskimo curlew was the master of the world beneath the surface. But it was in the air that the curlew's true nature was revealed. It was a creature of sublime grace, a painter of the skies.
But this grace was backed by immense power. Its wing beats were fast and shallow, an engine of speed that carried it across continents.
They flew with a purpose, often forming great arrowheads in the sky. A formation of perfect aerodynamics.
It was a signature in the air, a unique combination of grace and speed that wrote its story across the skies of 2 continents.
Its body was a perfect engine for flight. Powerful muscles, a respiratory system that could extract oils, and it was an engine that carried its own fuel. It could store incredible amounts of fat, a high-energy reserve that would be burned.
This was the ultimate test of the engine and the fuel. A non-stop 2,000-mile journey over the open.
A perfect engine and the fuel to power it. A body and a will built for it.
But for all its power in the air, its greatest defense on the ground was the art of invisibility. A coat of... To a hunter's eye, it simply was not there. A perfect deception, a ghost on the landscape. And it was a gift, passed down to every generation. The chicks were born wearing the same cloak of invisibility.
But the pattern was nothing without the discipline of stillness. An absolute lack of motion that completes the illusion.
This was the Eskimo curlew, a body of delicate efficiency, a beak of profound... And so, it lived its life as a secret, a hidden jewel, perfectly blended into the fabric of its world. Before the great prairies were tamed, they were home to a force of nature, great swarms of locusts. But the prairie had its own answer, a feathered army that followed the swarms. The Eskimo curlews. The feast was relentless. Each bird would eat its own weight in insects, a constant and tireless harvest that would last for weeks. And their impact was real. The great swarms would be visibly thinned, the plague lessened, by the tireless work of the feathered army. This was their first great role. They were the great regulators of the plains, a natural and powerful force that kept the world in balance. For the new settlers of the plains, the locust swarms were a terrifying and destructive force, capable of wiping.
And then, an unexpected ally would arrive from the sky. The curlews, drawn to the feet. It was a natural service of almost incalculable value. A free and perfect form of pest control and for a time, they were beloved. The settlers called them prairie pigeons or doughbirds, affectionate names. They were the guardians of the harvest, a vital partner in the success of the early heartland. But in the unforgiving logic of the food web, every hunter is also, eventually, the hunter. It was a vital transfer of energy. The small life of the insects, concentrated in the body of the curlew.
And on their nesting grounds, their eggs and chicks were a crucial source of food for the hunters of the tundra, like the cunning Arctic fox. Their abundance sustained the great predators of 2 continents. Their bodies were the fuel that raised the next generation. It was a vital link, a creature whose immense numbers provided the foundation of life for the hunters at the top of the food web. But their role in the ecosystem was not just about what they took. It was also about what they gave back. Every migration was a great transfer of wealth. Nutrients from the sea and the tundra were carried in their bodies for thousands.
Their droppings, rich in nitrogen and phosphorus, were a powerful natural fertilizer. Each flock...
Over thousands of years, this constant gift of nutrients helped create one of the richest ecosystems on Earth. They were more than just visitors to this land. They were its builders, a living river of fertility.
The curlew was a perfect cog in a perfect machine. Its every action, its feeding, its travel, its very presence. Their constant probing was a form of natural tilling. Millions of tiny plows aerating the soil, allowing inlets. And as they traveled, they carried the seeds of the north with them. They were long-distance gardeners. This was the world they helped to build and maintain. A world of rich. Because of all these vital roles, the Eskimo curlew was what is known as a keystone species. The central stone. Because when you remove a keystone, the structure cannot stand. Its absence sends a cascade of changes through the ecosystem. Hunter and hunted, gardener and guardian, a creator of soil. Its life was interwoven because when you remove a keystone, the structure cannot stand. Its absence weakens the entire system, leading to collapse. The great arch of the prairie did not completely fall, but it was forever weakened. The curlew's absence left a hole in the sky and a silence on the land.
For thousands of years, the curlew's world was in perfect balance.
Gastric-Brooding. It was the age of market hunting. The new railways could ship barrels of wild game to the booming cities of the... And the curlew's greatest strengths became its fatal flaws. Its massive flocks and its gentle, trusting nature made it an impossibly easy target.
The friendship between the farmer and the bird was forgotten. The great natural wonder was now seen only as... This was the beginning of the end.
The slaughter was on a scale that is hard to imagine. The birds' dense flocks, once their greatest defense, now ensured their complete destruction. Hunters described a rain of birds from the sky. So many were killed with each shot, they often did not have to reload before firing again. The ground would be littered with the dead and the wounded. It was not a hunt, but a harvest of death. It was not a fair fight, a creature of the Ice Age against the new, relentless machinery of malice. The engine driving this slaughter was the insatiable hunger of the new, great cities of the East.
And so they arrived by the trainload, not as birds, but as cargo, packed by the thousands.
They were sold by the thousands, for pennies a dozen. Their incredible abundance had become their final curse, making
us. And there was no escape. The new railways allowed the market hunters to follow the flocks, from one feeding.
And there was no escape. The new railways allowed the market hunt flotters to follow. No species could withstand a harvest on this scale. It was a war against a living thing, and there could only be...
And so, the inevitable began to happen. The great flocks, once a force of nature, began to...
Even the market hunters, who had seen the birds as an infinite resource, began to notice the change. They're easy.
And the thinning of the flock had a terrible consequence. Their greatest defense, their numbers, was gone.
And the sky itself was changing. The great, dark clouds of birds were gone.
But the hunt was not the only war being waged against the curlew. On the ground, their world was being systematic. The new fields of corn and wheat could not support the native insects. The Rocky Mountain locust starved of its food source. The curlews would arrive at their ancient stopover, expecting a feast, only to find a barren table. Without the fuel of the prairie insects, the great flight engine could not run. They were too weak to make the final.
Their world had been erased from under their feet. The second great blow had been struck, not by the gun, but by the plow. And the assault was coming from both ends of their journey. In South America, their winter home, the native grasses were replaced by fields for cattle and crops. The rich diversity of the pampas.
And so, the survivors of the Great Hunt and the barren prairies arrived at their winter home to find that it was a war on three fronts: hunted on their journey, starved at their stopover, and displaced from their winter mates. Their entire world, a path that had been perfect for 10,000 years, was now a path of wounds. And the assault was coming from both ends of their journey. In South America, their winter home, the Great Pagans, the native grasses were replaced by fields for cattle and crops. The rich diversity of the pampas. And so, the survivors of the Great Hunt and the barren prairies arrived at their winter home to find that it was a war on three fronts: hunted on their journey, starved at their stopover, and displaced from their winds. Their entire world, a path that had been perfect for 10,000 years, was now a path of wounds. And in the final years, there were only a few survivors left to witness the ruin of their world.
But the world was not listening. It was an age of progress, of industry, of noise.
And the numbers told the story. A population of millions, driven to the brink of extinction.
By the time the laws were changed, by the time the world began to notice, it was already too late.
And so, the stage was set for the final act. The story of the Eskimo Curlew was no longer the story of a great...
This were great dying.
The numbers tell a brutal story. A population that had been stable for 10,000 years was affected. For the survivors, the world was broken. Their great society was shattered. The safety... And still, the hunting continued. The last great flocks were pursued with the same relentless efficiency. In just 30 years, one of the great kings of the American sky had been brought to ruin. The throne was now empty. For the few that remained, the world was a different place. The Great Migration, once the ancient map, the shared knowledge of the flock, was broken. A single bird flying, and a single bird is a target. Without the protection of the flock, the last survivors were easy prey for their ancient, natural enemies. The sightings became fewer and farther between. Lone bird here, a pair there. A creature of the great flock, now utterly alone. This was to be its final fate.
And the people who lived on the land began to notice.
The spring was quieter now. The great, noisy, living storms that had once heralded the season were gone.
The farmers were the first to truly understand, to feel the silence in the skies where there once had been a roar. And their stories began to sound like myths, tales of a sky black with birds.
The horizon that had once promised their return, year after year, was now empty. In the mid-20th century, a new generation of scientists, armed with new knowledge of conservation, they found its cousins. They found its neighbors. They found a world full of life.
The trail was growing cold. A handful of confirmed reports in the mid-century. And then...
And for the last half-century, despite countless searches and fleeting, unconfirmed reports, the scientific record has been silent. The silence in the skies is now final. The great river of birds that once...
And so the final act began.
Each sighting was both a moment of hope and of profound sadness.
And then, for decades, an almost complete silence. A handful of fleeting, unconfirmed reports. But then, a final glimmer. A handful of credible reports in the post-war years. A ghost. And then, the last definitive record.
an island in the Caribbean, Barbados.
He did not know it, but he was the last of his kind, the last endling, the final. And after decades more of silence, the official verdict was rendered. While a flicker of hope may... It is now a ghost on a list, a memory that haunts the northern tundra.
A master of the wind, a devoted parent,